Welcome to Asia Pacific Week 2020. Asia Pacific Week is an interdisciplinary conference featuring students and young professionals from all over the world. This year marks the 10th anniversary of this conference. We come together to celebrate and develop the next generation of thought leaders. We welcome you aboard this journey with this year's theme, When Oceans Rise, Surging Voices and Hidden Perspectives. We hope you come away from this experience with a greater compassion and understanding for the complexity and diversity of our region. Hello and welcome to the opening ceremony of the Australian National University College of Asia and the Pacific's annual Asia Pacific Week conference. My name is Lucy and I am the director of this year's conference. I would like to begin by acknowledging the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people, the traditional custodians of the beautiful lands on which we stand, here in Canberra at the Australian National University. We wish to acknowledge and respect their continuing culture, aspirations and contributions that they make to the life of Canberra and the region. We are honoured to be joined by Dr. Auntie Matilda House, a Ngunnawal and Ngambri traditional owner and Canberra Indigenous elder, who will perform a traditional smoking ceremony.
Well, today we're here on the land of the Ngambri setter of the Ngambri and Ngunnawal. My name is Dr. Matilda House. I'm a very proud Ngambri woman, and I'm here to do this smoking ceremony for the Asia Pacific 2020 conference. And as of today, I am so proud to be here to do this smoking ceremony on the grounds of the Australian National University. And I do hope that everything goes well for the Asian Pacific Conference for 2020. And I do hope that this smoking ceremony, which will be here for everyone to notice and to care for country, and for those who are coming here to feel there is through a mutual respect. And the Asia Pacific Conference is things that will always be here because of the proud way we are doing the service for the 2020 Asia Pacific Conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Auntie Matilda, for performing this traditional smoking ceremony for us today. The Asia and the Pacific region is diverse, complex, and ever-evolving. Now in its 10th year, Asia Pacific Week continues to be a platform for young and emerging leaders to come together, share ideas, encourage curiosity and growth, and leave with a greater compassion and understanding of the issues we face in the region and beyond. When we first chose the theme for this year, When Oceans Rise, Surging Voices and Hidden Perspectives, we in Australia had just experienced one of the most devastating bushfire crises in our history. The consequences of climate change were at our doorstep. But little did we know that this was just the start of the challenges 2020 would bring. But with challenges come opportunities. Between the COVID-19 pandemic, natural disasters, and rippling social activism across the globe, we're living in a complex time where diversity can either bring us closer together or drive us further apart. This conference, we hope, is a chance for us to grow closer together and incite thought-provoking and nuanced discussions, drawing from each of your experiences and understandings. We will tackle questions such as the future of climate migration and displacement in our region. What key issues of governance and health inequity has the pandemic exposed? What are the experiences of women in diplomacy, and what insights does this provide about our progress towards gender equality? What is the role of the creative arts and popular culture in political and social spaces? And what have social media narratives shaped our understanding of contemporary issues in the region. In an increasingly globalised and interconnected world, the events of this year have brought people together in an unprecedented way. We have all begun to adapt to this brave new world. While we cannot welcome you to Canberra this year, we are grateful to have you join us from all over the world through this virtual event. I'd now like to introduce the distinguished speakers for this opening ceremony. It is with great pleasure we welcome Senator the Honourable Penny Wong, ANU Chancellor the Honourable Julie Bishop, Dean of the College of Asia and the Pacific, Professor Sharon Bell, and Academic Convener of Asia Pacific Week 2020, Associate Professor Katerina Teaiwa.
Thanks to the Australian National University and the College of Asia and the Pacific for inviting me to speak at this year's Asia Pacific Week. I want to congratulate the College of Asia and the Pacific for its work over the last 10 years to bring together students and professionals from around the world and across disciplines to face the challenges in our region. And as we all know, many of these challenges are accelerating in the wake of the pandemic. Your theme for this year is When Oceans Rise. It's a timely reminder that amidst the chaos of this past year and the massive social, strategic and economic changes brought on by the pandemic, the threats posed by climate change have continued to accelerate. And despite all of the resources dedicated to fighting the pandemic, the challenge of climate change still requires enormous policy responses to reduce global warming and chart new opportunities for a renewable energy future. One way of putting it is that climate change is the next pandemic. And there is no region in the world where this discussion is more salient and more urgent than the Indo-Pacific region. The reality of climate change is already with us. It's not a theoretical threat, it's an existential threat for many of our closest neighbours. Which is why Australian leadership to address climate change and build the region's resilience to it should be a core component of our engagement with the world. At the global level, this task should start with Australia fully implementing its Paris Accord targets, not relying on accounting tricks like Kyoto carryover credits. We need to reprise our reputation as an effective coalition builder to address global problems. This also means being a champion for our partners in the region and for our shared interests in addressing climate change. It means demonstrating leadership in global institutions to rally effective multilateral responses for the world in general and for our region in particular. We can't afford any more negative globalism. And it means demonstrating leadership at home by having effective climate change policies and charting a course for a renewable energy-led recovery from the pandemic. But it is becoming more obvious as countries outline their own paths to reducing emissions and tackling climate change that Australia is becoming increasingly isolated. The incoming Biden administration will rejoin the Paris Climate Agreement on day one. President-elect Biden has appointed the former Secretary of State who was instrumental in delivering the Paris Climate Agreement, John Kerry, as his climate envoy, to increase global momentum on climate action. This is a signal to the world of the US recommitting to global climate action. And President-elect Biden is committed to net zero emissions by 2050, and he's far from alone. Japan, South Korea, and dozens more countries have committed to reaching net zero emissions by 2050. China has said it will aim for carbon neutrality by 2060, not to mention the leadership by the United Kingdom and the European Union in setting ambitious reduction and renewable energy targets. Our partners in the Pacific have been steadfast in calling for global action and leading by example in the fight against this existential threat. By contrast, Australia stubbornly refuses to sign up to net zero emissions by 2050. Increasingly isolated, we risk being left behind if we don't accept the realities of climate change and the necessity of acting at home and abroad. This is not in Australia's interests. There are tens of thousands of jobs at stake. And it leaves us, a country that relies on international cooperation to get what we want and need in the world, as a spoiler on the single biggest issue the world faces. As long as the Morrison government insists on being part of the problem rather than part of the solution, Australia will not be a credible partner of choice in the Indo-Pacific region. And this isn't simply a matter of the status quo continuing to run its course. These are active decisions by this government that impede our ability to fight climate change and build our region's resilience. And they also reduce Australia's power and influence at a time where our region is more contested. We need to do so much more to develop deeper partnerships in the region that will support our shared recoveries. We need to act now to build the region we want, one that is stable, prosperous, resilient, and that respects sovereignty. And if we don't, we create a leadership vacuum that others will fill. Building the region we want requires both financially and intellectually investing in the region and in the toolkit that's needed to deliver Australian interests. And it means we have to do what we say. Unfortunately, over the last 7 years, we've seen cuts to development assistance and to our diplomatic capability. This has resulted in a Pacific step up that is both undermined by this government's lack of commitment to climate action and has come with the cost of a Southeast Asian step down. Southeast Asian nations are so important to Australia's security and stability. We need them much more than they need us, but our engagement doesn't reflect that. We should be doing more across both regions and multiplying our efforts with key partners. This means using our influence to help galvanise a multilateral response, including with major donors like Japan and the European Union, for the region's recovery and climate responses. And we should be working with the incoming Biden administration to ensure its Indo-Pacific strategy is geared towards Southeast Asia's pandemic recovery and long-term resilience. In terms of our own engagement in the region, let's start by stopping the aid cuts and reversing DFAT's decline. And we should integrate the work of the Pacific Step Up with our Southeast Asian outreach. We need to deliver practical benefits both for Australia and our partners in the region. The government's recent announcements on Southeast Asia will be of little meaning if not followed through with sustained increases in our investments and our engagement consistent with the region's needs. One-offs won't cut it. We have to deliver on what we say in the longer term. But investing in our region also starts at home. Our talented Asian and Pacific diaspora communities are a strength that we should draw on. Instead, we've seen the loyalty of Asian Australians questioned by some senators. This sends precisely the wrong message. It is this sort of gratuitous and inflammatory behaviour that makes our complex relationship with China more difficult to manage. We do have clear and substantial differences with China, but we can't simply decouple. Hundreds of thousands of hardworking Australians are relying on Australia having a productive relationship with China. We should do what we can to engage and to foster that productive relationship. As John Howard said recently, that must be managed at the leadership level between the Australian Prime Minister and China's President. And that is obviously not helped by inflammatory comments that put domestic political interests first in either country. The Chinese government recently said it will examine Australia's human rights record. Of course, China is free to raise issues of concern through the appropriate forums, just as Australia is free to do the same. This is why we have vital interests in an effective rules-based order in which we hold all countries to account over their international commitments, whether it's international law, human rights, trade, or climate. None of the challenges I've raised today are simple, as you well know. But the expertise and leadership of Asia-Pacific Week in this important discussion will enable the sharing of ideas and new perspectives to address them. And this is how we can build momentum and inspire collective action to solve global problems. So I look forward to continuing this discussion and hearing your ideas. I wish you well for the rest of the conference. Thank you.
Good afternoon. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to this opening ceremony. I join you from Perth, the traditional lands of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and acknowledge and welcome all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who may be attending today. This is the 10th year of the Asia-Pacific Week Conference, hosted by the ANU College of Asia and the Pacific, a conference led and run by passionate and curious ANU students who are driven by a desire to engage with and better understand the region. And each year, Asia-Pacific Week brings together 80 high-calibre delegates from around the world to participate. While the circumstances of this year mean we're unable to welcome you to the Australian National University in person, We are fortunate to host this conference virtually, enabling us to continue engaging in important conversations about issues in our region. This conference is known for its ability to draw in a cohort of people of different ages, backgrounds and countries. Asia Pacific Week is designed to equip delegates with the knowledge, skills and ideas to become leaders of change in the dynamic and evolving Asia Pacific region. The theme of the conference this year is apt: when oceans rise, surging voices and hidden perspectives. Given the natural disasters, the global pandemic and unrest in many parts of the world, this conference can be a platform for young leaders of the Asia-Pacific region to discuss these and other challenges and to share their observations and perspectives. I trust that you'll come away from this conference with new ideas, new perspectives, new friends and new networks, and with a greater understanding of the issues we face in this region and into the future. I hope you find this a rewarding experience, and please enjoy the conference.
Welcome to Asia Pacific Week 2020. I'm Professor Sharon Bell. I'm the Dean of the College of Asia and the Pacific. And it's a great pleasure to be welcoming you today, even though virtually. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting, the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people. I recognise that a number of people will be meeting from different parts of Australia, different traditional lands, and indeed different parts of the world. But for us, our recognition of our traditional owners and elders, past and present, is a really important way of thinking about the place, both real places and virtual places on which we are meeting. This year's theme of Asia Pacific Week, When Oceans Rise, conjures up many possibilities. Immediately, particularly at the present time, one thinks of perhaps catastrophic, almost challenging consequences. The rise of the oceans associated with climate and ecological change, and indeed some of the very challenging experiences we've addressed in 2020 in relation to the ecological interface with human society and the consequences of that. But it is also a way in which we can think of the oceans uplifting us, connecting us, and producing positive change. And that's what I hope you're really going to be able to focus on this week. This year's conference is a virtual conference, and that means that there are particular dimensions that will be very different to previous years. But if we think about the positives, one of the fantastic positives is that we are able to extend our reach. And I particularly welcome those who are coming from different parts of Australia and different parts of the world. My own perspectives on Asia and the Pacific are not just framed by the usual academic opportunities of research and travel, but indeed from the fantastic and privileged opportunity of having lived and worked in the northern part of Australia in Darwin for over 5 years. And that was really a critical part of my understanding, not just the geography, the spatial nature of our connections, but indeed the nature of relationship. The thing about Northern Australia, particularly far Northern Australia, is that Northern Australia looks north rather than south. The city of Darwin is in fact closer to a whole range of Asian cities than it is to the capital cities of the southeastern states of Australia. And that means that you begin to see through different eyes. You all bring that capacity to these dialogues this week, seeing through different eyes. It also means that when we think about contemporary events, we perhaps tend to frame them a little differently. So for instance, over recent weeks, there's been a lot of media coverage of the new trade agreement signed by our Prime Minister on behalf of Australia with 10 Asian countries, plus New Zealand, South Korea, China and Japan. And I stopped to think, what does that mean? What does that trade relationship mean? There's been much made that it may make a difference, for instance, to our relationship with China. It made me think from a Northern Australian perspective, we've been trading as a country, well, not perhaps as a country, but as a set of communities, with China since the early 18th century, since before Cook so-called discovered Australia. Macassan traders came from Sulawesi to the northern communities of Australia to meet with the Aboriginal communities of Australia and engage in trade. That trade was primarily based on trepang, that is sea cumber or bêche de mer, and involved patterns of relationship. Some Aboriginal communities welcomed the Macassans, others seemed, there is evidence that perhaps they restricted access to their fisheries. So some of those normal dimensions of negotiation around trade took place. But what we learn from this is that this was not just a transactional set of relationships. The evidence is that there was cultural impact, particularly in art, and there was also linguistic impact in terms of this set of relationships. So when we think about what we hear about trade relationships now in a formal sense, I think as the generation that is going to lead us in the future, we need to think much more broadly. We need to interrogate these opportunities and say, yes, trade is one thing. What are we going to do to deepen the relationships with the Asia Pacific for the future? As Dean of the College of Asia and the Pacific, I see this conference as being a wonderful opportunity for cross-disciplinary dialogue that really tests our assumptions and brings new ways of seeing and being into our perspectives and extends our knowledge. I think you have a huge responsibility and a huge set of opportunities as emerging leaders to ensure that you are shaping the future of the Asia Pacific in ways that perhaps previous generations, including my own, have really struggled with. You have opportunities to remake, you have opportunities to rethink, and you have opportunities to reimagine. And I hope these few days are going to present you with the most fantastic and stimulating opportunities to engage in those types of discussions. When oceans rise, we can be swamped and damaged. And as I said earlier, we can also be lifted up. I hope you are going to be lifted up and not be overwhelmed by the complexity of the future we face. I'd like to conclude by quoting Isabel Stengers, who says, curiously, the unexpected complexity that has been discovered in nature has not led to a slowdown in the progress of science, but on the contrary, to the emergence of new conceptual structures that now appear as essential to our understanding of the physical world, the world that includes us. Understanding our climate, our ecology, our social and our economic relations, as well as our political relations, are absolutely key to building a better and peaceful future. I do hope that your dialogue will lead to this unravelling of complexity and great insight into what that future will look like.
Hi, everyone. I'm Katerina Teaiwa. I'm an Associate Professor of Pacific Studies in the School of Culture, History and Language here in the College of Asia and the Pacific. And I'm really excited for all of you to be participating in Asia Pacific Week 2020. Before I begin, I want to acknowledge that we are coming to you from Indigenous Ngunnawal and Ngambri country here in Canberra in Australia. We are on unceded lands, always was, always will be Aboriginal land here, and we pay our respects to Indigenous elders and their descendants. And we're very grateful to be able to live and work and do what we do here in Ngunnawal and Ngambri country. So I'm in Pacific Studies in the School of Culture, History and Language, and I've been working with the wonderful organizers of Asia Pacific Week for the last 10 months. I imagine Lucy may have mentioned that they've had quite a few challenges over these last 10 months because of COVID, And before that, we had all other kinds of environmental challenges here in Canberra. We had bushfires, we had smoke, we had hail. So all of us here at the ANU have been on a bit of a journey this year, but we're still quite excited to be able to connect with and gather with all of you to do what is our 10-year anniversary of Asia Pacific Week. So it's a bit special. It's not quite what we would have normally done if we were able to meet face to face, but I would like to acknowledge that the College of Asia and the Pacific has been doing Asia Pacific Week for 10 years now. And so it is a bit of a special anniversary. So quite a wonderful group of our students have been working on all aspects of the program that you will be experiencing over the next few days. I know Lucy would have mentioned the panels, the very exciting panels that they've put together for you, the special projects, the other parts of the program, and every part of that program has been really well thought through and considered, and I'm quite proud of this group of students for being able to deliver that, especially in the virtual format that it will be delivered in this year. I think, like many of you across the region and definitely in other universities, we've been experimenting with digital platforms, with Zoom and other platforms for delivery of our content. And I know it's not the same as being face-to-face, but we're still very passionate about the kinds of themes that we'll be discussing and talking about for Asia Pacific Week, and also hearing from you about your thoughts and ideas and opinions on these themes and what kind of further reflection can come out of it, so that we can make some changes, do better, and hear from voices that we don't normally hear from. So you know that the theme of Asia Pacific Week is Surging Voices and Hidden Perspectives. And I just want to share a little bit by way of my own work in terms of what this theme means to me. So this is the first Asia Pacific Week where I've been the academic convener. I've known about Asia Pacific Week for many years. But this year I was brought in specifically to be able to enhance the Pacific dimension of Asia Pacific Week. So our theme is partly inspired by lots of things that have been going on in our region, but particularly in the Pacific Islands with respect to the issue of climate change. I know we're all in the middle of dealing with the pandemic, but climate change has never gone away in terms of its importance to our region. And in many ways, the pandemic is another kind of consequence of climate change. So the focus for the Pacific region has always been climate change, and there's very much an oceanic dimension to the theme that the students have put together for you this year. In my work, it very much comes out in terms of my teaching in Pacific Studies. So I teach undergraduate Pacific Studies, and I also supervise PhD students working in Pacific Studies. And some of them do research on the history of environmental activism in the Pacific, on histories of Pacific Islanders protecting their environment, trying to speak to the broader world about issues such as nuclear testing, climate change, mining, destruction of their environment, and trying to get their voices heard on a regional and a global stage. So these sorts of issues partially inspired our theme, and I have seen and witnessed and heard from many amazing young people in our region who are very, very passionate about holding governments, holding or major organizations, holding major fossil fuel emitters to account for what is happening to the planet at the moment. I feel like we have a very, very great sense of urgency to address this issue. We don't have time, really, not to pay attention to the very real impacts of climate change. And I'm very inspired by young people, including many of our students at ANU, who care a lot about these issues. So you will be hearing from some of them on the panels, and you'll definitely be hearing about these issues during Asia Pacific Week, but in my teaching, I highlight the work, for example, of people like the Pacific Climate Warriors, which is a group of young activists from all across the Pacific region who also work in solidarity with other groups, such as young Indigenous groups, and together they try to hold big business, big government accountable for the impacts of climate change and the need for us to have policies and actions put in place to prevent the planet from heating up over 1.5 degrees, which it is already very much on track to do. So these are the kinds of hidden voices that I hope you will consider and reflect on as part of the suite of themes involved in this conference. And even though in our part of the world, these voices very much try to gain visibility, I'm not sure how much they're taken seriously on the global stage and in major circles of decision-making and of power. So it is really important for people like you, people in the positions that you're in. I know some of you are studying, some of you may already be in positions and jobs to make a difference. I think it's really important for all of you to talk to each other and consider how we can address the kind of major environmental crisis that's facing us, and to do it in very proactive, very compassionate, but very serious ways, because like I said, there isn't a lot of time left for us. So it is in the hands of the next generation, and I'm very proud of the students in our group for the care and concern they've put into the kinds of themes that they've selected, which are about climate change, but they're also about other issues. But like I said, these issues are all related to each other. They all articulate with each other, whether you're talking about the pandemic, whether you're talking about popular culture and social media. These are all platforms and forums for people to share their ideas, share their perspectives, to be heard, hopefully with integrity. But we also know that spaces like social media also tend to share other kinds of information, which are not always so truthful. So issues of ethics and integrity, and the problems that we see around the world in terms of the kinds of narratives that are being spun in political, economic, and environmental spaces, these are all the perspectives that I hope you will be thinking of for Asia Pacific Week. Again, I wish we could be doing this in person, because there's nothing like the face-to-face embodied experience of sharing and learning and growing and problem solving. But hopefully it will still work in the virtual format. And I know the students have really designed an experience for all of you that allows you to connect to and reflect on the very serious issues, but also form a sense of community and kinship and solidarity with each other across all of our borders and boundaries and nation states. And that kind of working together is really what's needed right now to address and solve some of these major problems and issues that we're facing. So on behalf of the College of Asia and the Pacific, on behalf of our group of Asia Pacific organizers, students, I'd like to welcome you all to Asia Pacific Week 2020. And I'd also like to thank staff and others behind the scenes who've supported the Asia Pacific Week organizers and helped make this happen. So there's staff in our student support services space, Jenna, Lyndon, Marin, who have all been really working hard and supporting our students to be able to deliver this. There's also staff in our college communications and media office who've been supporting the students. There's staff in the School of Culture, History and Language, where I'm based, who've been very supportive of this. Lots of people from the Carl Bell School and other parts of the college have all pitched in or participated and gotten involved in Asia Pacific Week. So I'm really proud of what the students have been able to do to bring all these different groups together and get the support from different aspects of the college and beyond as well to participate. And I also want to thank those who've agreed to speak on many of our panels. We have some quite esteemed folks who are participating, and I really want to thank them as well for getting involved. I think sometimes it can be quite intimidating for some of our students to be able to reach out to some of the panelists they've been able to put together, but it's come together so amazingly, and I'm really proud of what they've been able to achieve. So thank you to everyone who's helped supported Asia Pacific Week, and thank you to all of you for applying and participating. I hope the technology holds up and everyone gets to beam in when they need to, and you're able to interact with each other. I think you'll have some fun, but there will also be some serious and challenging discussions as well. And that's what Asia Pacific Week is about. And I look forward to seeing how the next few days pan out. Thank you so much.
To everyone who's joined us today, the Honourable Penny Wong, the Honourable Julie Bishop, and to all the wonderful speakers, we thank you for your time, wisdom, and invaluable insights. We'd also like to take this opportunity to thank everyone who has made this event possible, particularly from the Office of the Dean of the College of Asia and the Pacific. Thank you, Professor Sharon Bell, for your ongoing support. We'd like to extend that thank you to everyone at the college, including the college education and student services team and the marketing and facility teams. We'd also like to thank Associate Professor Katerina Teaiwa for her wisdom and guidance through this year, without which this event would not be possible. To our wonderful delegates this year, on behalf of the organising committee, we are so excited to meet you. The committee has been working hard for the past 10 months to bring you a vibrant and diverse schedule of events. Your deputy directors, Evelyn and Patrick, have been in charge of finance and outreach, and it is to their credit we are able to have this event. Your content coordinators, Isabella, Madeline, and Jocelyn, have been working tirelessly to bring you a stellar lineup of panels with experienced and engaging guest speakers. While your special project coordinators, Ava and Isabel, have put together a delightful array of social events to create opportunities for connection despite the distance. You will already have met your delegate coordinators, Kazi and Grace, who've been working hard to ensure the delegate experience APW is renowned for will continue this year. Your logistics coordinators, Ella and Jacqueline, have been in charge of technology and the finer details of this event to ensure a seamless experience. And finally, it is to the credit of your media and marketing coordinators, Romaine and Jocelyn, that we have been able to reach so many diverse delegates all over the world and read your wonderful applications. Welcome again to Asia Pacific Week 2020. We now invite you to join us on Zoom to unpack the rest of your delegate goodies before diving into our first panel of the week. See you very soon.